Well, everyone wants to know this Senate, is it going to switch parties? What, in your expert analysis, are the one or two states this is going to come down to?
Well, it's definitely going to come down to Louisiana, and the interesting thing about that is that we're not going to know that until December. Louisiana has kind of a unique law where everyone's on the ballot, and if you don't get 50%, then they go to a runoff in December. And I don't think, based on the amount of people that are on the ballot and what the polls are showing, that anyone is going to get 50% in Louisiana. So I think that we will see a race in December, a runoff for that, and that could very well determine it. Right now, though, I see a strong likelihood for a Republican gain, and a takeover of the majority, and it ultimately being about 52-48. I think, obviously, Louisiana, as we talked about, will be key, but I do think that North Carolina and Colorado are two other states that people should keep their eyes on. I think that if those go Republican, or one of those goes Republican, I think that we'll be seeing a possibly 52-48 breakout in favor of the Republicans.
What's going on in Kansas? Kansas has a quirky thing going on, doesn't it?
Well, it is. They've Kansas has a longtime Republican senator, and Senator Pat Roberts, who's running for re-election and running for his political life. To be honest with you, and they have an independent candidate who's on the ballot who uh, is not your typical independent candidate. He's got a lot of money raised. He's got a good organization. He's strong. There's a lot of support for him. He's polling well, and he's got a very good chance of winning. Now, they don't know who he would caucus with if he were to win. That's always a case-by-case situation. The two independents that are in the Senate right now currently caucus with the Democrats, but that doesn't necessarily mean that this individual will. So there's a lot of unknowns there. But if the Republicans can win Louisiana, Arkansas, Iowa, Alaska, and North Carolina, then they won't necessarily need to worry about Kansas.
Don't you think he should say which team he would play with?
Um, I think it's up to the voters in the state if it's something that they really think that they want to know. But I would argue that these days voters don't really care, don't want to know, particularly in the Senate, because they're fed up with party politics, and they also know that in the Senate, unless you have 60 votes, it's everything is doesn't really, a majority is really kind of all relative anyway. So I think those that are hardcore Republican or Democrat voters would like to know. But I have a feeling that independent voters in Kansas don't really care.
We are 40 some odd days or so away from Election Day, and last night President Obama started bombing targets in Syria with this air campaign. What is that going to do to the electorate, and are people worried that that's going to sway it one way or the other?
It's not going to sway it one way or the other. It might help a Democrat Senate candidate, one here or there, and I think it's certainly not going to hurt the Democrats any more than they already have been. But I do think it's a little too late. I think that the president has created this political situation where the Republicans are likely to take over the Senate. It's not that the Republicans have got this great agenda right now. I mean, I'll be the first to acknowledge. I think that they win the majority. It's primarily because of a very unpopular president who has put himself in this position due to lack of leadership and some other very controversial public policy. So, I think that what the president is doing as it relates to ISIS and over in the Middle East is something that the people have been craving, that type of leadership, and looking for. But I think it's too little, too late.
Not that anything's going to get done in the next 2 years anyway, but what's the big deal if the Senate goes Republican or stays Democrat? Nothing's getting done in Washington anyway.
Well, nothing has been getting done, and I'm certainly not going to try to paint some rosy picture for next year, because based on what we've seen the last couple of years, how could you do that? But I do think if the Republicans gain control of the Senate, that you're going to see a very interesting dynamic, because you have a Republican-controlled House and Senate. There would be easier to move certain pieces of legislation. Granted, you'd still need on controversial legislation 60 votes to in the Senate to really get anything through to the president's desk. But I think that you would even see some Democrats and some independents who are not beholden to Harry Reid as they are now, that are focused more on their own reelections for the next cycle, start to maybe support some of these policies that the Republicans would move, and that would get him to the president's desk, and he would be forced with a decision to make, and he would be forced to either stand his ideological ground, which he's very, willing and capable to do, unfortunately, or, finally acknowledge that he's got to negotiate and try to find a middle ground somewhere. So I think it's very likely that we could see a lot of activity next year, especially with the Republican control of the House and Senate.
So you think that if the Republicans take control of the Senate, there actually might be more work done, because if Obama moves to a sort of a third way like Clinton works with their Republican House and Senate, more things might get done?
Well, absolutely. I think that there'll be a lot more that gets passed and sent to the president's desk if there's a Republican House and Republican Senate. The problem has been Harry Reid, because he has held up. He's been in a position, it doesn't get talked about a lot or reported a lot, but as the majority leader of the Senate, I mean, he really holds up a considerable amount of legislation that he does not want to send to the White House, that he's got a strong influence over those Democrats right now, and I just don't think that would be the case. I think a lot of more conservative Democrats would be thinking about their reelection the next time, and they would be inclined to kind of abandon the pressures that Harry Reid's putting on them, and possibly go with the Republicans on some of these bills. I mean, not some of these hardcore conservative pieces of legislation, but certainly ones that that people think need to be passed. So I do think that we'd see more done, and the president would be in a situation where he'd have to decide if he's going to support it or not.
Now that your Red Sox are in dead last place and have no chance of winning the World Series, are you going to root for your college roommate this year?
I'm always going to root for him. Proud of what he does, no question about it. But I'm also a big Nats fan. That's not a fair weather thing. I've lived in DC. I've lived in DC for over 20 years. We're excited about this. We all have Nats fever. We've had it over the last few years. I'm definitely Red Sox first, but we're very excited about the Nats trying to make a run this year.
You a San Antonio Spurs fan too, I guess?
Nope.
Alabama football fan, maybe?
I've got credibility from where I live. I've lived here longer than even I've lived in Boston. So.
All right, so Matheny cannot catch a break with his old college roommate.
Hey, he knows how much I'm proud of him and support everything he's done, and hope that he gets there, unless he's playing one of my teams.
Trey, be good. Talk to you next week.
All right, see you later.
6:30 here on the Big 550 KTRS. Ladies and gentlemen, J.D. Power and